The quickest way to create an international crisis is to mistake authority for power. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Massachusetts Avenue, Washington, D.C., where embassies stood behind iron gates and polished flags drifted gently in the summer breeze. It was a neighborhood where every license plate carried meaning, every visitor represented a nation, and every decision made by law enforcement could echo far beyond the city's borders. Traffic moved steadily until a black diplomatic sedan rolled quietly through an intersection, its small diplomatic plates barely noticeable to anyone who wasn't trained to recognize them. Officer Daniel Harper noticed. His patrol vehicle pulled away from the curb without hesitation. Blue lights flashed. The sedan slowed immediately before coming to a smooth, lawful stop beside the sidewalk. Pedestrians glanced over. A few tourists instinctively reached for their phones. Most assumed it was another routine traffic stop. It wasn't. Daniel stepped from his cruiser with the confidence of a man who had spent years believing his badge answered every question before anyone else could speak. His partner, Officer Ryan Mitchell, followed several steps behind, scanning the quiet street without sensing anything unusual. The driver's window lowered. Inside sat a middle-aged black man wearing a charcoal suit, a white shirt, and a navy tie. His posture was calm. His expression carried neither fear nor irritation. Resting neatly beside him on the passenger seat was a leather briefcase, marked only by a small silver emblem. "Good afternoon, officer," the man said politely. Daniel ignored the greeting. "License and registration." The man nodded without argument. "Certainly." Instead of reaching immediately toward the glove compartment, he opened a slim leather wallet and presented a dark-colored passport. Daniel looked down. The cover displayed gold lettering. Diplomatic passport. He barely glanced at it before lowering his hand. "I asked for your driver's license." "You certainly did," the man replied with remarkable composure. "I wanted to make sure you understood my official status before we continued." Daniel let out a quiet laugh. "I don't care what passport you're carrying." Ryan shifted slightly behind him. Something about the document had caught his attention. Daniel never noticed. The man calmly removed his driver's license and handed it over. "My name is Marcus Ellison." Daniel studied the card, then looked back at Marcus. "So," he said slowly, "what exactly do you do?" Marcus answered without hesitation. "I represent my country in diplomatic matters." Daniel smirked. "That's a nice way of saying politician." Marcus offered the faintest smile. "No, it's a way of saying my work requires certain legal protections." Daniel folded the license into one hand. "We'll decide what protections apply out here." Imagine standing on a quiet street, knowing the person speaking to you has complete authority over the next few minutes, yet also knowing they have no idea who they're actually talking to. Real authority doesn't rush to introduce itself. It waits. Traffic continued passing as if nothing unusual were happening. Cyclists rode by. Tourists admired embassy buildings across the avenue. The city carried on. Only the people standing beside the black sedan could feel the tension beginning to grow. Daniel stepped closer. "Step out of the vehicle." Marcus looked directly at him. "Officer, may I ask why?" "Because I'm giving you a lawful order." Marcus slowly opened the door. "I will comply." Without the slightest hint of resistance, he stepped onto the sidewalk. Ryan watched carefully. There was no sudden movement, no raised voice, no threatening gesture, only quiet cooperation. Marcus straightened his jacket. "Officer Harper." Daniel frowned. "I never told you my name." Marcus glanced briefly toward the embroidered nameplate on Daniel's uniform. It was visible. Ryan almost smiled. Daniel didn't. Instead, he interpreted the observation as disrespect. "You think you're clever?" "No, officer. I think misunderstandings become expensive when assumptions replace facts." Daniel shook his head. "Save the speeches." He motioned toward the patrol car. "Place your hands behind your back." Several pedestrians stopped walking. One woman quietly began recording with her phone. Marcus remained perfectly still. "I respectfully advise you to verify my diplomatic status before taking another step." Daniel's expression hardened. "You don't tell me how to do my job." Ryan leaned closer. "Daniel, I think maybe we should call this in first." Daniel didn't even look at him. "I've got this." Marcus slowly placed both hands behind his back without resistance. The steel handcuffs clicked shut. The sharp metallic sound echoed down the quiet street. A tourist whispered, "Did they just arrest a diplomat?" No one answered. Marcus looked once toward the embassy flags moving gently above the avenue before turning back to Daniel. His voice remained calm, measured, almost impossibly steady. Officer, this moment will be remembered by far more people than either of us can currently see. Daniel simply tightened his grip on the cuffs. He believed he had just completed another routine arrest. He had no idea that, within the next hour, his badge would become the center of an international conversation. Officer Daniel Harper tightened his grip on the handcuffs as if the cold steel itself confirmed he had made the right decision. Marcus Ellison offered no resistance. He simply stood beside the patrol car, his hands secured behind his back, while afternoon traffic flowed past the embassy district as though nothing extraordinary had happened. But something had changed. People were no longer walking by. They were watching. A businessman slowed to a stop outside a nearby cafe. Two tourists lowered the maps they had been studying. The woman who had started recording earlier was now joined by several others, their phones quietly capturing every second. Officer Ryan Mitchell noticed before Daniel did. We're getting a crowd. Daniel barely looked up. They'll leave. Ryan wasn't so sure. This wasn't an ordinary neighborhood. The diplomatic quarter had its own rhythm, its own rules. People here recognized official vehicles, official plates, official protocol. Marcus calmly broke the silence. Officer Harper. Daniel glanced toward him. I strongly recommend that you contact your supervisor before transporting me. Daniel gave a short laugh. You've already tried. That. I'm not making a threat. Marcus' voice remained remarkably steady. I'm trying to prevent a mistake from becoming a larger one. Daniel stepped closer. The only mistake here is thinking a passport puts you above the law. Marcus met his eyes without the slightest trace of anger. I've never said that. I said my status should be verified. Ryan quietly leaned toward Daniel. He's been asking for the same thing since the stop. Daniel ignored him. Imagine watching someone remain completely calm while losing every visible advantage. No raised voice. No panic. No resistance. Sometimes confidence doesn't come from believing you'll win. Sometimes it comes from already knowing how the story ends. The dispatcher suddenly crackled over Daniel's shoulder radio. Unit 12, status check. Daniel pressed the microphone. Routine detention. Stand by. The response sounded unusually brief. Ryan frowned. That was odd. Daniel shrugged. Marcus remained silent. Across the street, the gates of a nearby embassy slowly opened. A black SUV exited, escorted by another diplomatic vehicle. Neither stopped, but both slowed noticeably as they passed the scene. Their occupants looked toward the patrol car, then continued down the avenue. Ryan followed them with his eyes. I think they noticed. Daniel answered without concern. Good. Let them. Marcus lowered his head for only a moment before speaking again. Officer, you still have time to correct this. Daniel folded his arms. And if I don't? Marcus looked toward the embassy flags moving gently above the buildings. Then this situation will no longer belong to either of us. Those words lingered in the air. Not as a warning, as a certainty. Another police cruiser arrived. Two additional officers stepped out. One of them, Sergeant Linda Foster, immediately walked toward Daniel. What do we have? Daniel answered confidently. Uncooperative driver. Ryan spoke before Daniel could continue. He presented diplomatic identification. Daniel shot him a sharp look. He also refused to answer basic questions. Marcus spoke quietly. I answered every lawful question. Sergeant Foster looked from Daniel to Marcus. Then, toward the diplomatic passport resting on the hood of the patrol car. Her expression changed almost imperceptibly. Did dispatch verify his status? Daniel shook his head. Didn't need to. You didn't ask? I didn't have to. The sergeant didn't respond immediately. Instead, she picked up the passport with both hands and studied its cover carefully. For the first time since the stop began, someone in uniform appeared more interested in the document than in defending the arrest. Before she could say another word, Daniel's shoulder radio crackled again. This time the dispatcher's voice carried a tone no officer ever wanted to hear. Unit 12. A brief pause followed. Then came the next sentence. Do not transport the detainee. The entire street seemed to fall silent. The words from dispatch hung in the air longer than anyone expected. Unit 12. Do not transport the detainee. For a brief moment, even the sounds of passing traffic seemed to disappear. Officer Daniel Harper stared at the radio clipped to his shoulder. What? The dispatcher didn't answer immediately. Instead, Another voice came across the channel. Calmer. More senior. Unit 12, acknowledge. Daniel pressed the microphone. This is Unit 12. Negative on transport. I repeat, hold your current location. Daniel frowned. On what authority? Static filled the radio for several seconds. Then the transmission ended. Ryan Mitchell slowly exhaled. I've never heard dispatch interrupt an arrest like that. Daniel clipped the microphone back onto his vest. They're overreacting. Marcus Ellison remained standing quietly beside the patrol vehicle. His wrists were still secured. His expression hadn't changed. Not once. Imagine knowing that every minute someone delays the truth only makes the truth more impossible to ignore. Real authority rarely raises its voice. It simply arrives. Sergeant Linda Foster stepped a few feet away and quietly made a phone call. Daniel watched her. What's the problem? She covered the receiver. I'm verifying his credentials. You don't need to. I think I do. Daniel shook his head. He was detained legally. Marcus finally spoke. Sergeant. She looked toward him. Thank you. Those two simple words caught her off guard. You don't seem very concerned. Marcus offered a respectful nod. I've learned that people reveal their character under pressure. And today, he glanced briefly toward Daniel. Everyone is making choices. Across the street, several embassy security officers had appeared near their entrance. They weren't approaching. They simply watched. One spoke quietly into an earpiece. Another looked toward the patrol cars without taking his eyes off the scene. Ryan noticed them immediately. I think they're monitoring this. Daniel answered without turning around. They can monitor all they want. A black SUV passed the intersection. Then another. Neither carried emergency lights. Neither displayed police markings. Yet both slowed almost imperceptibly before continuing. The atmosphere on the street had changed. People no longer looked curious. They looked concerned. Sergeant Foster returned. Her expression was noticeably different. She approached Daniel quietly. I need you to remove the handcuffs. Daniel stared at her. What? Now? I'm not doing that. His identity is being verified through federal channels. Daniel folded his arms. So we wait. Daniel laughed once. I'm not releasing someone because they flashed an expensive passport. Marcus spoke calmly. I never asked to be released. Everyone turned toward him. I asked for my status to be verified. The distinction settled over the group. Ryan lowered his eyes. For the first time, he realized Marcus had never demanded special treatment. Only proper procedure. A new radio transmission broke the silence. This one came through every patrol car at once. Attention all units in the embassy district. Every officer instinctively looked toward their radios. Remain on your assigned channels. Stand by for priority communication from federal authorities. Daniel's confidence faltered for the first time. He looked towards Sergeant Foster. What federal authorities? She didn't answer. Because she didn't know. Neither did anyone else. Within seconds, another unfamiliar voice came over the radio. Measured. Professional. This is the Diplomatic Security Service. We are attempting to establish direct contact with the supervising officer at the current detention. Ryan slowly looked toward Marcus. Marcus simply stood in silence, the afternoon breeze gently moving the edge of his suit jacket. No anger. No panic. Only patience. Daniel suddenly realized something that unsettled him far more than the growing crowd. Marcus had never once tried to convince anyone of who he was. He had behaved like a man who already knew someone else would do it for him. And somewhere beyond the streets of Washington, that process had already begun. No one moved. Even Officer Daniel Harper, who had approached the traffic stop with complete confidence, found himself staring at the radio clipped to his vest as though it might explain what was happening. It didn't. The only explanation was the silence that followed. A silence filled with unanswered questions. Sergeant Linda Foster stepped toward Marcus Ellison. Sir, she said professionally, may I ask which mission you're assigned to? Marcus answered with the same calm composure he had maintained since the stop began. I'm not authorized to discuss operational details on a public street. It wasn't evasive. It was procedural. Foster recognized the difference immediately. Daniel did not. He folded his arms. See, he's still refusing to cooperate. Marcus turned slightly toward him. I've cooperated with every lawful instruction you've given. I exited the vehicle. I provided identification. I submitted to handcuffs without resistance. He paused. What I have not done is surrender legal protections that exist independently of your opinion. Ryan Mitchell quietly lowered his eyes. Every sentence Marcus spoke sounded measured, precise, almost as though every word had been chosen long before this day. Imagine trying to overpower someone, only to discover they never intended to fight you in the first place. Some people win arguments. Others simply wait for the facts to arrive. A black SUV slowly entered the block and stopped at the far curb. It carried no diplomatic flags, no emergency lights, only dark windows. Two men stepped out wearing conservative suits and discreet earpieces. Neither approached the officers. Instead, they remained beside the vehicle, quietly observing. Ryan noticed them immediately. "You know those guys?" Marcus answered honestly. "I do." Daniel laughed. "So now your friends are here?" Marcus shook his head. "They're not here because I called them. They're here because someone else did." Those words lingered. Sergeant Foster glanced toward the suited men before turning back to dispatch. "This is Sergeant Foster requesting immediate clarification regarding federal involvement." The dispatcher responded almost instantly. "Stand by, Sergeant." Less than 30 seconds later, another transmission followed. "This incident is now under joint review. Maintain the current scene. Do not conduct further questioning." Daniel frowned. Joint review by who? No answer came. Instead, the dispatcher added one final instruction. "Additional federal representatives are en route." Daniel's confidence began slipping beneath the surface. He looked toward Foster. "This is getting ridiculous." She answered quietly. "Or it's getting serious." Marcus remained completely still. The handcuffs had not changed his posture, nor had the gathering crowd. Several embassy employees now stood behind security fences watching in silence. News photographers had begun arriving after receiving tips from bystanders. Camera lenses slowly turned toward the patrol cars. Toward Daniel. Toward Marcus. Ryan leaned closer to Daniel. "We should uncuff him until this gets sorted out." Daniel answered immediately. "No. What if they're right?" "I'm right." The certainty in his voice sounded weaker than before. Marcus looked toward the sky for a brief moment. Clouds drifted slowly above Embassy Row. Then he spoke one final sentence. "I sincerely hope your department values accountability more than pride." Before Daniel could respond, every officer on the scene heard the unmistakable sound of approaching motorcycle escorts. Heads turned together. At the far end of the avenue, a coordinated motorcade appeared, moving with disciplined precision between the rows of embassy buildings. Police motorcycles, black government SUVs, State Department security vehicles, and at their center, a limousine displaying the unmistakable blue flag of the United Nations. For the first time since placing the handcuffs on Marcus Ellison, Officer Daniel Harper felt something he had refused to acknowledge all afternoon. Doubt. The motorcade did not arrive with sirens. It arrived with certainty. Police motorcycles rolled into the intersection first, creating a silent corridor through the afternoon traffic. Behind them came a line of black government SUVs, each moving with deliberate precision. State Department security vehicles followed closely, their drivers communicating through discreet headsets while bystanders instinctively stepped back from the curb. Every conversation on the street stopped. Officer Daniel Harper watched without speaking. For the first time that afternoon, he wasn't the center of attention. The arriving vehicles were. The limousine bearing the blue United Nations flag came to a smooth stop less than 50 feet from the patrol cars. Its rear door opened. A tall man in a dark navy suit stepped onto the pavement. His silver hair reflected the late afternoon sun. He surveyed the scene once. Nothing more. Then he began walking. Two diplomatic security service agents followed several steps behind him, accompanied by officials from the U.S. Department of State. Nobody rushed. Nobody shouted. Real authority rarely needed either. Imagine expecting an argument, only to watch people arrive who already know the facts before anyone speaks. That kind of confidence cannot be performed. It comes from responsibility. Sergeant Linda Foster immediately stepped forward. "Good afternoon." The distinguished visitor acknowledged her with a polite nod before his attention shifted toward Marcus Ellison. Marcus remained standing beside the patrol vehicle, still handcuffed, still composed. The two men exchanged nothing more than a brief look. No surprise, no panic, only quiet recognition. The visitor finally turned towards Sergeant Foster. "My name is Ambassador Charles Bennett. I serve as the permanent representative of the United States mission to the United Nations." His voice remained calm, professional, measured. "I've come regarding Mr. Marcus Ellison." Daniel stepped forward before anyone else could respond. Sir, this individual is currently being detained pending verification. Ambassador Bennett looked directly at him. And your name? Officer Daniel Harper. The ambassador gave a slight nod. I appreciate your answer. His eyes lowered briefly toward the handcuffs secured around Marcus' wrists. Then back to Daniel. Officer Harper, who authorized the detention of a credentialed diplomat before verification of diplomatic status. Daniel hesitated. I made that decision. The words sounded much less confident than they had only minutes earlier. Ryan Mitchell quietly looked away. The surrounding cameras captured every second. News photographers had now gathered behind the police line. Microphones were beginning to appear. The story had already escaped the sidewalk. Ambassador Bennett spoke again. Was diplomatic security contacted before restraints were applied? Daniel remained silent. Sergeant Foster answered instead. No, Ambassador. The ambassador acknowledged her response with another calm nod. I see. No criticism. No raised voice. Only facts. Those facts carried far more weight than anger ever could. Marcus finally spoke. Ambassador, thank you for coming. Bennett looked toward him. I'm sorry you had to wait. Marcus smiled faintly. I've been in more difficult meetings. A few officers exchanged uncertain glances. Even now, Marcus refused to embarrass anyone. He wasn't interested in revenge. He was interested in procedure. The ambassador slowly faced Daniel once more. Officer Harper, I need you to understand something. This is no longer a routine traffic stop. He paused long enough for every camera to capture the moment. This has become an international diplomatic matter. Daniel swallowed. The certainty that had guided every decision since activating his emergency lights was gone, replaced by a realization that arrived far too late. He had believed he was exercising authority. Instead, he had unknowingly challenged protections recognized far beyond the streets of Washington. And the next words spoken by Ambassador Bennett would determine whether this incident ended as a misunderstanding or became a career-defining mistake. The silence after Ambassador Charles Bennett's final sentence carried more weight than any shouted command. This has become an international diplomatic matter. No one responded immediately. Not Officer Daniel Harper. Not Sergeant Linda Foster. Not even the growing line of reporters standing behind the police perimeter. The only sound came from camera shutters capturing every expression, every hesitation, every choice. Ambassador Bennett slowly stepped toward Marcus Ellison. He stopped just outside arm's reach. Mr. Ellison, are you all right? Marcus nodded politely. I'm fine, Ambassador. I'm more concerned that proper diplomatic protocol wasn't followed. There was no anger in his voice, only disappointment. The kind that comes from watching a preventable mistake become something much larger. Imagine carrying authority recognized around the world, yet never using it to humiliate someone who has just misused their own. That restraint often reveals more character than power ever can. Ambassador Bennett turned towards Sergeant Foster. Sergeant, has Mr. Ellison's diplomatic credential now been verified? Foster answered without hesitation. Yes, Ambassador. Dispatch confirmed his status through the Diplomatic Security Service. And he possesses full diplomatic immunity. The words settled heavily over the scene. Even the officers who had arrived moments earlier exchanged uneasy glances. There was no longer any uncertainty, only consequences. Daniel finally spoke. If that's true, Ambassador Bennett looked directly at him. It is. Daniel swallowed. I wasn't informed. No, you chose not to verify. The distinction was impossible to ignore. Ryan Mitchell lowered his head. He remembered suggesting verification. He remembered asking Daniel to slow down. Neither memory made him feel better. Ambassador Bennett continued calmly. Officer Harper, diplomatic immunity is not a personal favor. It is an international legal obligation. It exists so governments may communicate without fear that diplomacy will depend upon individual opinion. Every sentence was delivered without raising his voice. That made them even more powerful. Marcus remained silent. He had no interest in correcting anyone. The facts were already doing that. Sergeant Foster stepped beside Daniel. You need to remove the restraints. Daniel hesitated. His eyes briefly met Marcus. For the first time that afternoon, there was no confidence left in them. Only realization. Slowly, he reached for the handcuffs. The metal clicked open. Marcus calmly brought his hands forward and gently rubbed one wrist. He never complained, never demanded an apology, never celebrated. The officers watching expected anger. Instead, Marcus quietly adjusted the sleeve of his jacket as though returning to an ordinary workday. The cameras recorded everything, including that. Ambassador Bennett watched the scene carefully before speaking once more. Mr. Ellison, would you like to make a formal statement at this time? Marcus looked briefly toward Daniel, then toward the officers standing nearby. Finally, he answered, Not yet. I believe everyone deserves the opportunity to understand what happened before conclusions are reached. Several reporters looked at one another in surprise. That wasn't the answer anyone expected. Marcus could have publicly condemned the arrest. He chose restraint. Daniel remained motionless. The weight of the moment grew heavier with every passing second. Ambassador Bennett nodded respectfully. Very well. He then turned back toward Daniel one final time. Officer Harper, I have one remaining question. Daniel looked up. What is it, sir? The ambassador's expression never changed. Please tell me. When you decided to place a credentialed diplomat in handcuffs without verifying his protected status, what exactly did you believe your badge authorized you to do? No one spoke. No one moved. Because every person standing on that street understood the same thing. The answer to that question would matter far beyond Washington. It would determine whether this incident remained an isolated mistake or became an example remembered in police training rooms for years to come. The question lingered over the street like a verdict waiting to be read. What exactly did you believe your badge authorized you to do? Officer Daniel Harper searched for an answer. None came. Not because he had forgotten his training. Because, for the first time that afternoon, he was forced to separate authority from assumption. The cameras remained fixed on him. Every officer nearby remained silent. Even the reporters lowered their microphones, sensing that the next few moments would define the entire incident. Daniel finally cleared his throat. I believed I was enforcing the law. Ambassador Charles Bennett gave a slow nod. I don't doubt that. He paused. But enforcing the law begins with understanding it. The distinction landed with unmistakable force. No accusation. No humiliation. Only a truth that was impossible to dismiss. Imagine discovering that the greatest mistake of your career wasn't made out of malice alone, but from refusing to verify what could have been confirmed in less than a minute. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive with punishment. Sometimes it arrives with clarity. Sergeant Linda Foster stepped closer, holding a tablet recently delivered by a diplomatic security service agent. The verification package has been completed. She handed it to the ambassador first. Inside were official credentials, diplomatic registration records, and confirmation that Marcus Ellison had been assigned to a permanent diplomatic mission under internationally recognized protections. Every document matched perfectly. Every timestamp aligned. There was no uncertainty left. Ambassador Bennett returned the tablet to Sergeant Foster. Thank you. He then looked toward Marcus. Mr. Ellison, your status has been fully confirmed before all relevant agencies. Marcus acknowledged him with a respectful nod. I appreciate everyone's efforts to establish the facts. Daniel looked down at the pavement. Ryan Mitchell quietly spoke for the first time in several minutes. I told you we should verify. Daniel didn't respond. There was nothing left to argue. Chief Rebecca Lawson's unmarked vehicle rolled quietly into the secured area. The police chief stepped out without ceremony, greeted the ambassador with a professional handshake, and listened as Sergeant Foster summarized the incident. She asked only 3 questions. Was diplomatic status verified? Yes. Was the arrest initiated before verification? Yes. Were body cameras active? Yes. She nodded once. Preserve every recording. The order was calm, immediate, absolute. Chief Lawson then walked directly toward Officer Harper. Daniel. He looked up. I'm placing you on administrative leave effective immediately while an internal review is conducted. No one gasped. No one celebrated. The decision felt less like punishment than procedure finally catching up with the facts. Daniel slowly removed his patrol gloves, then his portable radio. Finally, after a brief hesitation, he unclipped the silver badge from the front of his uniform. He stared at it for a moment before placing it into the chief's waiting hand. Its weight seemed far greater than metal alone. Marcus watched quietly. There was no satisfaction in his expression, only reflection. The reporters expected a dramatic confrontation. Instead, they witnessed something far more powerful. Professional accountability. Ambassador Bennett turned toward the assembled officers. Today's lesson is not about diplomacy. It's about discipline. The law protects everyone most effectively when no one believes they stand above procedure. Chief Lawson nodded in agreement. Around them, cameras continued recording. Not a scandal. A lesson. As Marcus picked up his briefcase, he glanced once toward Daniel. I hope, he said gently, that the next person you stop is met with the verification I was denied. Then he walked toward the waiting diplomatic vehicle, leaving behind a street where authority had been tested, and where dignity had quietly prevailed. As the diplomatic motorcade quietly departed, the flashing police lights remained. But somehow, they no longer felt like symbols of authority. They felt like reminders. Officer Daniel Harper stood beside Chief Rebecca Lawson without his badge, his radio, or the certainty that had accompanied him only an hour earlier. The cameras continued recording. Reporters spoke in hushed voices as satellite trucks arrived along the opposite curb. What had begun as an ordinary traffic stop had become the lead story for every major newsroom covering Washington. Yet Marcus Ellison had offered no public accusation, no dramatic speech, no demand for revenge. That decision surprised almost everyone. Imagine possessing every opportunity to embarrass the person who wronged you, yet choosing instead to protect the integrity of the institutions both of you serve. That choice often requires more strength than retaliation ever could. Chief Lawson gathered the officers involved. Her voice remained calm, but unmistakably firm. This department will conduct a complete administrative review. Every body camera recording will be preserved. Every dispatch communication will be documented. And every procedural decision made today will be examined. No one objected. No one could. Facts had already replaced opinions. Sergeant Linda Foster handed Daniel an official envelope. Administrative leave paperwork. He accepted it without looking inside. Ryan Mitchell stood quietly nearby. After several moments, he stepped toward Daniel. I never wanted this to happen. Daniel nodded faintly. I know. I should have listened. Ryan didn't answer. There was nothing left to add. Across the street, Ambassador Charles Bennett spoke briefly with representatives from the Department of State before approaching Chief Lawson one final time. I appreciate your department's cooperation. Chief Lawson answered honestly. I only wish cooperation had begun before the arrest. The ambassador gave a respectful nod. So do I. Neither attempted to minimize what had happened. Neither exaggerated it. Professionalism required neither. Marcus finished speaking with diplomatic security agents before walking toward the chief. She met him halfway. Mr. Ellison, I owe you an apology on behalf of this department. Marcus regarded her with quiet respect. I accept your apology. But I hope today's lesson reaches further than this street. Chief Lawson understood immediately. It will. Marcus continued. The public doesn't lose trust because mistakes happen. They lose trust when institutions refuse to learn from them. The chief nodded slowly. I agree. Several reporters captured every word. Not because anyone was arguing. Because accountability was unfolding in plain sight. Daniel watched the conversation from several yards away. For the first time, he saw Marcus not as the driver he had stopped, but as a public servant carrying responsibilities different from his own. Responsibilities he had never taken the time to understand. Chief Lawson turned toward Daniel. I expect your full cooperation during the investigation. You'll provide a complete written statement before the end of tomorrow. Yes, Chief. His voice was quieter now, less defensive, almost reflective. Marcus picked up his briefcase and prepared to leave. Before entering the waiting diplomatic vehicle, he paused beside Daniel. For several seconds, neither man spoke. Finally, Marcus extended his hand. Not as forgiveness, not as approval, as dignity. After a brief hesitation, Daniel accepted it. The handshake lasted only a moment, but every camera on the street captured it. A symbol not that the mistake had disappeared, but that accountability had begun. As the diplomatic vehicle pulled away beneath the fluttering embassy flags, the afternoon returned to its ordinary rhythm. Traffic resumed. Pedestrians continued walking. Yet everyone who had witnessed the encounter carried away the same realization. Power may stop a car. Procedure protects justice. And when those two are separated, even a badge can no longer stand alone. Several months later, the street looked exactly as it always had. Embassy flags still swayed gently above Massachusetts Avenue. Diplomatic vehicles continued moving through the city with quiet purpose. Tourists still pause to admire the historic buildings without realizing how many conversations affecting the world took place behind those gates. Time had moved forward, but the lessons from one afternoon had not been forgotten. The Metropolitan Police Department had completed its internal review. New procedural guidance required officers assigned to the diplomatic district to verify protected status through the Diplomatic Security Service before taking enforcement action whenever diplomatic credentials were presented. The policy wasn't created because the law had changed. It was created because people had finally remembered to follow it. Imagine changing an institution, not through anger, not through revenge, but because one person refused to surrender dignity, even while wearing handcuffs. Sometimes the greatest victories are measured by what never happens again. Officer Daniel Harper sat quietly inside a mandatory training classroom alongside dozens of other officers. The instructor dimmed the lights. A body camera recording appeared on the screen. Daniel immediately recognized the street. The traffic stop. His own voice. His own decisions. Nobody laughed. Nobody mocked him. The lesson wasn't about humiliation. It was about responsibility. The instructor paused the recording just before the handcuffs were applied, then asked a simple question. What should have happened here? One young officer answered, verification before detention. Another added, procedure before assumption. The instructor nodded. Exactly. Daniel lowered his eyes. He realized the most painful consequence of that day wasn't losing his badge. It was recognizing how easily certainty had replaced judgment. Across town, Marcus Ellison continued serving his diplomatic mission. He never accepted television interviews. He declined repeated requests to turn the incident into a public campaign. When asked why, he offered the same quiet answer every time. The purpose of accountability is improvement, not spectacle. Ambassador Charles Bennett smiled when he heard those words. They'll remember you for that, he said. Marcus simply replied, I hope they remember the lesson instead. Weeks later, Chief Rebecca Lawson addressed a graduating class at the police academy. She closed her speech with a story. She never mentioned names. She never identified the officers involved. She spoke only about the responsibility carried by every badge. The authority to stop someone, she said, must never replace the duty to understand who stands before you. The room remained silent. Every recruit listened. Every instructor understood. Some lessons arrive in textbooks. Others arrive through mistakes no one wishes to repeat. As evening settled once again over Washington, Marcus walked alone past the same intersection where everything had begun. The traffic light changed. Cars continued through. No cameras waited. No reporters stood nearby. It had become an ordinary street once more. Marcus paused briefly, looking toward the embassy flags moving gently in the breeze. Then he smiled, not because justice had embarrassed someone, but because justice had strengthened something. He adjusted his jacket, picked up his briefcase, and continued walking toward the work that still awaited him. Behind him, the city carried on. Ahead of him, diplomacy continued. And somewhere inside every officer who would one day watch that training video, one simple truth remained. A badge may grant authority, but character determines how that authority is remembered. Because the strongest form of justice is never the one that destroys a person. It is the one that transforms the future.